that's a story. It's what it is. It's history. It's history of God's people, the Israelites. So we're going to turn to 1 Samuel. Now, nothing yet has been resolved regarding the Israelites. They're still kind of going back and forth. They're still going into apostasy and going into different religions. And God is, keeps bringing them back. And we're going to see in these books that that's exactly what's happening until the monarchy is established. And that will be started up at the end of the last chapters with King David coming on again. But right now, the story begins with a woman named Hannah. Now, Hannah is married to a man named Elkanah, which possibly he comes from the line of Levites. And she's very sad and weeps bitterly because she cannot conceive. She's barren. Her husband's other wife has bore many children, and of course this, she doesn't say she's jealous, but she wants the child, from her husband. She wants the child from the Lord. And of course this wife keeps heckling her and ridiculing her and just making her miserable. And so Hannah keeps praying to the Lord, and one day she goes to the temple of the Lord and she's praying, crying out to God in such a way that she's very, very emotional. And Eli's sitting right there, and he's seeing her, and he's thinking, whoa, this woman is drunk. Because it was not uncommon for people to go to the temple to pray in a drunken state. And that goes to show another, thing about the Israelites, that they were just so deceived. And so anyway, Eli hears her, and he says something to her in that regard, and she says, I'm not drunk. I'm praying to God, I'm crying out to God, I want to bear a son. And so she makes a vow that if God will give her a son, she'll dedicate him to the Lord. And he will also be a Nazirite. No razor will come to his head. And she's just dedicating and giving him to the Lord. And so when the time comes, she does bear a son, and his name is Obed. And Samuel. And she keeps her word. Her husband tells her, be sure you keep your word to the Lord. You dedicate him to the Lord. So she's getting him weaned, and then after he's weaned, she takes him to the temple. And there she takes some bread, and she takes a bowl for 3 years old and younger, and a bottle of wine. And she's going to officially dedicate him to the Lord. So she does that, and he becomes, a student of Eli. And at some point, when he's older, his mom takes him to the temple and leaves him there. And I think he's probably about 10, 11 years old. Leaves him there to be instructed by Eli. And so every year that he's there, his mom, she makes a little ephod for him, a new little coat for him every year, as he's growing. So he's dedicated to the Lord. He knows what his calling is. He's very faithful to the Lord. And so he's in the temple, and the light's about to go out in the tabernacle, and so Eli lays down and closes his eyes. By this time, Eli's still already kind of old, and his vision is kind of dim. Mm-hmm. So he's laying there, and Samuel is in the temple, and he's about to lay down, and he hears his name called, Samuel. So he goes to Eli, and he says, you called me, here I am, or I am here, that's the way he says it. And Eli says, I didn't call you, go back to bed, go lay down. So he sends him back to bed, we know the story. Again he calls him. Again he goes to Eli, again Eli says, I didn't call you. So on the third time that Samuel does this, he goes to Eli. Eli realizes that it must be God calling him. That's the main call. And this little note is such a blessing to me, because I wasn't very old in the Lord when I went to a conference, somehow God just shoved me into ministry, not shoved me, but he pushed me into ministry almost from day one of my new birth experience and my being baptized in the Holy Spirit. And so at this time, I was very new in the Lord, and I was president of a women's group in Carpinteria, where I lived. And they took up an offering and gathered enough money for me to go to a conference in Canada. And in the conference, I didn't know anything about visions or dreams. But in the conference, when we were in the full worship, and worship was just awesome. I mean, you know, it was just like heaven. And I had a vision, and a similar thing happened to me that happened to Samuel. I was behind this wall, and I think the reason the wall was there was because I knew Jesus as my Savior, but for some reason I couldn't acknowledge Father God. I couldn't acknowledge Father. I always prayed to Jesus. And I'm behind this wall. I'm about 5 or 6 years old. And God calls, well, I hear my name called, Adelina. And I look around and there isn't anybody. So I keep playing and doing my little thing as a child. And again, Adelina. And I listened again, and I thought maybe my parents called me. And again, I didn't see anybody, so I continued to play. The third time he called me, the wall was about probably 6 or 7 feet tall, and it was about like 12 feet wide. It was thick. It was like block wall. I went over to the other side of the wall, and I looked around the wall, and Father God was sitting on his throne. And he summoned me to come to him, and picked me up, and put me in his arms, and loved me, and just loved me. I had never had any love as a child. My parents never picked me up, never told me they loved me. There was never any physical contact, no nice words. It was just eat a little breakfast because we didn't have much money, and just go out and play. So we would be gone all day long and just exploring. And that time we lived in Goleta. If you know where Goleta is, it's kind of on the north side of Santa Barbara. Very open. So I just let him love me, and after that I was able to pray to the Father in Jesus' name. But he put me down, and I remember I went behind him. He was sitting on his throne, and all of a sudden it was Jesus. And I was brushing his hair. And that was the vision that I had, so I could really relate to Samuel. Not that I'm saying he called me as a prophet or anything like that, but just that the consistency of God, the beauty of God to show his love through repetitive motions that he does to show his love. So I could really relate to that. Well, anyway, Samuel is trained by Eli to be a prophet of the Lord. By the time he grows up, everybody in that area, all of Israel probably knows that he was called to be a prophet. So let's read 1 Samuel chapter 2, starting at verse 22. Now Eli was very old, and he heard everything his sons did to all Israel, and how they lay with the women who assembled at the door of the tabernacle. I think I don't know if I mentioned that Eli's sons ended up being really wicked. So he said to them, "Why do you do such things? For I hear of your evil doings from all the people." He said, "No, my sons, for it is not a good report that I hear. You make the Lord's people transgress." So anyway, he tells them that they're going to be judged, and then as the child Samuel grew in stature and in favor with the Lord and men, a man of God came to Eli, and they're always together, Eli and Samuel. Okay, so a man of God comes to Eli and says to him, "Thus says the Lord, didn't I clearly reveal myself to the house of your father when you were in Egypt and in Pharaoh's house? Did I not choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer my altar at my altar, to burn incense and to wear an ephod before me? And did I not give to the house of your father all the offerings of the children of Israel?" Now see, God is bringing correction to Eli because he's going to move him out of the scene very closely here. He's going to cut off the arm of the father's house. So there, in other words, there isn't going to be any more inheritance from Eli. And then he said, then I will raise up a faithful priest, which I did a study on that. And it's the priest Zadok, which is ministering in David's time and also in Solomon's time. So there's coming a separation there, and the Lord is moving Samuel into that place of Eli. Eli was the prophet, right? Now Samuel's moving into that place. In chapter 3, verse 1, it says, then the boy Samuel ministered to the Lord before Eli, and the word of the Lord was there in those days. There was no widespread revelation. And it came to pass at that time, while Eli was laying down in his place, and this is when God calls Samuel. Well, later he gives Samuel a revelation, and the first revelation was in chapter 3, verse 11. He said, then the Lord said to Samuel, behold, I will do something in Israel in which both the ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. In that day I will perform against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house, from beginning to end. And the reason for that is because Eli knew what his sons were doing. And he brought some correction, but he didn't restrain them. And that was not a good thing. So Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and he let none of his words fall to the ground. This is in verse 19 through 21. And all of Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel had been established as the prophet of the Lord. And the Lord appeared again in Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel in Shiloh by the word of the Lord. So now we see, the ministry of Samuel coming into play. And of course, there's still always battles going on, and the Philistines come against the Israelites, and they defeat them. And so Hophni and Phinehas, which were Eli's sons, were there, and within the battle, and somehow the ark was close by, and so the Israelites sent for the ark and said, if God is with us, then we're not going to be defeated. They bring the ark into the camp, but they're still defeated, and the ark is stolen. It's taken away. So they seem to think that if the ark is with them, then God is with them. They're not realizing, they're not getting it, but that God is all powerful, and God is everywhere. He's all knowing, He's all powerful, He's omniscient. But they think that if they have the ark with them, then they're going to be okay and God will protect them. Well, they're going to find out that's not true. So the ark is stolen, and the Philistines, of course, take it. It's captured. And when somebody comes to him and says that the ark was stolen, somehow it's like he went out in the spirit. It's like he fell backward. Eli did. He fell backward, and he broke his neck and died. I mean, this is pretty strong. Anyway, his two sons end up dying in that battle also for their wickedness. The ark is taken to Ashdod, taken there, and is put in the temple of Dagon, which is, a pagan god. They put the ark in there, and the Israelites, the Philistines get up the next morning and go into the temple, and the image of Dagon is flat on his face in front of the ark. And so they pick him up, or they pick it up, put it back on its stand, and then they go out there the next morning, and this time his hands and his head are cut off. And just the body's standing there. So they get really fearful. So they send the ark to Ekron. It's there for a while, and the people there start getting hit with boils, and to me they sounded like cancerous boils and all kinds of distress, all kinds of plagues and stuff. So then they send it somewhere else. And the people there don't want to keep it very long because they've heard about all the plagues, and so they want it, they want it out of there. They're called, in Ekron, they're called the Ekronites. They cried out saying, they have brought the ark of God, Israel, to us to kill us and kill our people. So they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, send away the ark of God of Israel and let it go back to its own place. so that it does not kill us and our people, for there was a deadly destruction throughout that city. That's another city. The hand of God was very heavy, and the men who did not die were stricken with the tumors, and the cries of the city went up to heaven. Okay, so then, oh, get this. So then the Philistines decide, well, we better send it back to Israel, you know. We're not going to send it back empty-handed. We're going to send it back with an offering. Guess what they send back? Golden tumors and golden rats. I don't think the Lord was very pleased with that. But they sent 5 golden tumors, and it was like significant of the number of the lords that they had in their army, and also it was the number of something about plagues had come to them 5 times, so it was like a record of that. And so they made the images, and they sent it to Beth Shemesh. And from Beth Shemesh, they sent it to, he struck the men of Beth Shemesh because they had looked into the Lord's, into the ark, they looked into the ark of the Lord. They had it there for quite a long time. And I guess somebody decided, hey, let's go see what it's all about, you know. So they looked into the ark, and same thing happened to them. He struck 50,000 and 70 men of the people, and the people lamented because the Lord had struck the people with a great slaughter. Yeah. Now they send it to Kirjath Jearim, saying, the Philistines have brought back the ark of the Lord, come down and take it up with you. So Israel returns to the Lord, and they take the ark with them. And Samuel tells them, he raises up and tells them, if you will return to the Lord with all your heart, I'm in Samuel 7, verse 3, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtoreths from among you, and prepare your hearts for the Lord, and serve him only, and he will deliver you from the hands of the Philistines. So the children of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtoreths and served the Lord only. And Samuel said, gather all Israel to Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you. So they gathered together at Mizpah, drew water, and poured it out before the Lord, and they fasted that day, and said, there we have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel judged the children of Israel at Mizpah. Now they go into battle again with the Philistines. And so I think in that time they were also defeated. They pursued the Philistines and drove them back as far, actually the Israelites won that one, I think. They pursued the Philistines and drove them back as far as Beth-kar. Now Israel was restored, and so the ark is moved to Bethlehem, or to Shiloh. Samuel judged for about 40 years, and he did a circuit. He went like from Bethel to Gilgal to Mizpah, but he judged Israel in all those places. And then in chapter 8, okay, he made his, sometimes it goes back and forth, and you're going to see that. If you do a real clear, real study on this, sometimes what's happening here is going to be happening over here. You know what I mean? And vice versa. So there's different prophets telling the story, or different writers of the Bible telling the story. So here we see again that Samuel's, okay, now this is Samuel's sons, I'm sorry. He was going to make them judges. Yeah, he named his first boy Joel, and the second one was Abijah. But his sons also did not walk in the ways of the Lord. And so they turned after dishonest gain and took bribes and perverted justice. So he said to him, look, you are old. Oh, this is what, the elders of Israel gathered and said, look, it's with Samuel, and said to him, look, you are old and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make for us a king. So this is when Saul comes into the picture. Okay? We know that he's a head and shoulders taller than all the other Israelites, a very handsome man. So he's chosen and anointed. Oil is poured over him, and he becomes the king. Now, at the same time, I will see later that a little bit later he anoints David. So, you know, they're kind of like both king at the same time, but David's not taking his place. Saul is king, but Saul turns out to be a very evil king. And you know that he pursues David, tries to kill him. But first, before that, he was really bothered by an evil spirit, and so he asked his servants to find somebody that could, play the harp very nicely, and just to kind of soothe him and comfort him. And so guess who's chosen is David. He had already been anointed, by the way, by Samuel. But he comes and he plays the harp, and sure enough, the evil spirit leaves Saul. But we'll see that later. He brings David in, and he's so jealous of him. And while David's playing the harp, Saul has got a spear in his hand and trying to kill him. So it's a very interesting story.
Mm-hmm.
So they make him king, and Samuel confirms him. And he does have success at the beginning, but we'll see that, okay, he's walking with Samuel, and they're going to go ahead and go into battle again, but they're waiting for Samuel to come and do the sin offering and the guilt offering and the burnt offering, but Samuel doesn't get there in time. So Saul decides he's going to do it. Well, that brought consequences. He shouldn't have done that. He did not obey the voice of the Lord. Samuel said to Saul, "You have done foolish. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. So now your kingdom will not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you." And it had to do with that offering. Not just anybody could, set up the stones and do an offering in those days. And we're not even doing offerings anymore, but there was strict instructions from the Lord regarding offerings. And then we see Saul, they're in battle again, and talks about Saul's selfish curse. They're in battle, and he tells the people not to eat at all. But Jonathan is someplace else, and he's had a real victory over a certain area in the battle, and he comes back, and he sees I think it's a rock, and it's got honey in it, and he's hungry. He's been in battle all this time. So he takes his staff, and he puts it in the honey and eats some. And the people say to him, "Oh boy, you're in trouble now. You're going to die, because your father made he set a curse, more or less." But so they all wanted to kill Jonathan, and Saul wanted to kill Jonathan, I'm sorry, but they all wanted him to be spared. And so they came together and said, "You can't do this. He's a man of war, he's a good person." I'm just kind of using my own words now. But anyway, so they do spare him. And here again, Samuel in chapter 15, it says, "Samuel also said to Saul, 'The Lord sent me to anoint you king over this people, Israel. Now heed therefore the voice of the Lord. Thus the Lord of hosts says, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel.'" This is out when they did to them in the wilderness. How he laid wait for him in the way when they came out of Egypt. So they went to attack Amalek. He also struck the king. Here's where he gets really in trouble too. He does go, and God does give them into his hands, and God tells them not to leave anything alive, and not even not to take any spoil. But he spares the king Agag, and he takes the spoil. And he says that the reason he took it is because he wanted to make offerings to the Lord. Well, that doesn't go very well. When you get an instruction from God, you have to obey. Faith and obedience, right? Well, Saul claims that he did obey the voice of the Lord. So he did take he said he took the plunder and all that to do the sacrificing to the Lord. And this is when Samuel said in verse 15, verse 22, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, and obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is a sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is an iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he also has rejected you from being king. So this is when things start going down. And Samuel ends up telling him, I will not return to you again, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. Then we know that, David is officially anointed and set in place at some point. But right now, they're still kind of in the middle of that battle. And of course, David is running from Saul, and Saul's trying to get him and kill him. But now it goes back to the story of David and Goliath. So we know the story of David and Goliath. Goliath was about 9 feet 9 inches tall. He was a giant, and David was feeding the sheep. I may be going back and forth because that's kind of how it sets it out sometimes. But at the same time, I was telling Pastor Rory on the way over here, there's so much in these 2 chapters that we really can't teach on it. You kind of just have to tell the story. But we know how David came and his father sent him with some food for his brothers, and he started asking questions about what was going on with the giant. And one of his brothers got really upset at him. But Saul heard about it, and so I think he was kind of like tongue in cheek. I gave him his armor and all that. Because David said he could take it on. He says, who is this Philistine, that comes against him? So, but David doesn't want the armor. And he has a little pouch, picks up 3 smooth stones, and we know the story. Goliath and David start coming towards each other. David takes a stone out of his little sack, hits Goliath with it and kills him. Ends up cutting off his head with his own sword. And so that's the story there. And then we know the story of David and Jonathan. Jonathan loves David like a brother. I mean, they just, have you ever met somebody that you just you click, and you know that you're going to be good friends, and you're going to be able to trust them. And then there's other people that you meet, and they're good friends, and they're Christians, but you're never going to really come close, or if you try to come close, they end up betraying you in some way, or, something happens that a little bit on down the road with your relationship that it's very superficial, very shallow relationship. So, but apparently Jonathan and David really hit it off, and they had a good relationship, and so therefore Jonathan was very concerned about David and didn't want him killed. And he constantly told his father, why do you want to kill him? He hasn't done anything. What has he done? And even David would ask that. Ask your father, what have I done? He even asked all that. So, especially when David goes out to war because Saul sent him, and he comes back, victorious, and the women come out with the tambourines, and everybody's singing, and they call out, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Well, that really started the jealousy thing. That made it even worse for David. So he calls him into his palace, and as when David starts to play, he throws that spear at him again. So by this time, Jonathan is up to what King Saul is trying to do, and he tries to help David, and so he helps him get away. David's by himself a lot of the time until later. He ends up with some people that don't like what they see Saul doing in the kingdom, and so they hook up with David at some point in some city where he went. We're not even done with Samuel yet. What time do I have?
We've got at least another 15 minutes.
Okay. So David flees, and David again, he battles with the Philistines. Kind of always seems to be a battle with the Philistines. Saul, David's fighting with the Philistines, and Saul's chasing David. And we know that in one instance, King Saul and his army are in this one place, and David's in this cave. And King Saul comes in, quote, to relieve himself, And David goes up and cuts a piece of his robe. And he confronts him after that and says, look, I could have killed you. You know, you were brought into my hands to kill you, but I didn't because you're the anointed of God. And so Saul kind of repents, and then we see another instance where he comes and he's in camp, and the Lord puts a deep sleep over all the soldiers, and David takes his water jug and his spear. And again, you know, he asks him, you know, what it is that he's so angry at him about and why he's, you know, wanting to kill him. So, anyway, it goes on, and at one point when David's out in battle, the Amalekites come in and they steal all the women and the children, so they steal David's wife and his concubines, and of course they're, you know, really mourning, and some of the men are even blaming David, but they do go back out and they do get their people back, gets his wife back and everything. And then in 2 Samuel, we see that there's a battle going on. King Saul is involved, of course, and King Saul is struck. And he goes down. He's not dead yet, but he wants to die because he doesn't want to be embarrassed, you know, in front of Israel that he was killed by the enemy. So he asks his armor bearer to run him through with a spear, and his armor bearer won't do it. So Saul falls on his own sword and commits suicide. And then his armor bearer does the same thing. Later we'll see that this young man comes and says, you know, that he's the one that killed Saul because he knew that he was an enemy of David. And has his spear, I think, has something of his. And David ends up putting him in and put to death because he's still feeling like Saul is God's anointed. You know, I mean, he's very respectful. We were talking about respect on the way over. You know how even if we don't agree with someone, you know, we still have to respect. Right. We still always respect, you know, others in the body of Christ. Now Abner, he was the commander of Saul's army, and he was actually Saul's cousin. He was leading Israel, and Judah followed David. This is still kind of going on with the kingdoms. So we know that one of Saul's nephews ends up killing. Let's see. I wrote everything down here, but there's so much. It's just like, whoa. Anyway, he ends up killing him because of killing his brother. But he killed him in battle, and he shouldn't have taken, you know, offense at that. You know, that happens in battle. But, so David was not very happy about that. Then David gets, he gets anointed, and he begins to reign over Israel. So now it's Judah and Israel. They capture Jerusalem, and they want to take the ark back. So they gather the ark, but they put it, instead of doing it the way that God had instructed, putting it on the Levi's shoulders, they made a new cart for it, and they pulled it with cows. And that was displeasing to the Lord. And then when Uzziah, what's his name? Yeah. I never know how to pronounce his name. Anyway, the ark's about to fall, so he goes to hold it while he was killed on the spot. But it was all because really there was an incorrect way of carrying the ark. Now later we see that David carried the ark into Jerusalem to put in the temple, but it was the correct way. They carried it on their shoulders, they bared the ark on their shoulders, and they sang songs and worshipped. And this is when Michal, David's wife, she despises him because she thinks it's, you know, not very nice of him to be out there dancing with the Lord in front of all the people. So, yeah. So, so David had a lot of victories. He receives a lot of spoil. we know that Jonathan, at the same time that Saul was killed in that battle, well, he was wounded in that battle and then he killed himself, Jonathan was also killed, and a couple of other of his brothers. So there comes a time where David says, you know, is there anybody of that house that survives, you know, that I can be kind to? And we bring him Mephibosheth. Okay. Anyway, he's lame in his feet because when the war broke out, his maid tried to, you know, get him away, and he ended up falling and injured his feet, and so he was lame. And he took care of him. And then you know the story of David, seeing Bathsheba on the roof and desiring her, and then he has her husband killed. By the way, Uriah was a Hittite, but he was a believer in God. So, but that, you know, that was sad. And David does repent, but the child that they bear ends up being very sick, and the child dies. David fasted while the child was still alive, you know, praying that God would, you know, restore him, but he died. So right after he died, he bathed and put, you know, nice clothes on and went and had a meal. And one of the servants asked him why he did that. Why did he fast while his son was alive and then eat after his son dies? And he explained that to him. And then we see the story of Absalom and his sister Tamar with his half-brother, I think it was Ammon. And Absalom ends up murdering Ammon. Absalom flees, and we know what happens there. He tries to get the people gathered around him, just follow him instead of his father David. So there's a rebellion there. He did have a reign for a while, though. Later in 1 Kings, there was one instance here where David disobeys the Lord in the numbering of the troops. And in one study guide that I had, it said that Satan entered him and had him do that. And they were never to do that unless they were instructed by the Lord. And it's possible that David may have had pride and wanted to know how many men he had gained, you know, over the years, or wanted to know how many men he would have in reserve for an emergency. You know, so he got corrected on that, and some punishment on that. And then David sings the song to the Lord. And then in chapter 23 is his last words. And then in that same chapter, it lists all the deeds of David and all his mighty men. So that's it. And then when we get into 1 Kings, we're going to see that, you know, David ends up getting very old and he dies. So we'll be doing that next. We'll be doing first and 2 Kings. So you might want to read through. And you know, there's so much here that you really have to just get into it yourself and just study on your own, you know. And it's hard to sometimes to the placement of things. Like you could read in another Old Testament book, and you'll read a story of what happened in 1 Samuel, or you know. So you kind of just have to try to figure out a timeline of all these things that are happening. But really, it's history. And you know, if we didn't have the Holy Spirit, I really believe that God withholds all that, because you know, Satan can't do anything unless God allows him. So he was allowed in those, Satan had more foothold in those days, and he was allowed to do more. And I think it was a big test of the Israelites to see if they would serve their God. Mm-hmm. But now we have the Holy Spirit here, and even if the Holy Spirit is not in you, if you're not a believer, the Holy Spirit still is in the earth. And so I believe God withholds that kind of activities, you know, distresses and plagues and all that going on. You know, although some of us would end up with tumors, right? But anyway, so be encouraged. I believe it or not, I did a lot of study on this, and I went back and forth and tried to just decipher, you know, all the things that seem to not contradict. Because, for instance, there's Shibboleth. That's Saul's son. But it also says he's lame in his feet. So I think somehow they interjected the Shibboleth in there with his lame feet. So that's Saul's son, and Meshibboleth was Jonathan's son. So, you know, you have to kind of be aware of all those things. And, you know, how I think it's important because as stewards of the Word of God, you know, we need to know the Word and